Hello, and this evening, Greg and I are going to be talking about theatre. It's kind of what conjoins us in terms of our past, but we sort of promised last week, or at least the week before, that we're going to do this thing about the play's the thing, um, wherein I'll capture the conscience of the king. So that's a quote from Hamlet. The way Greg and I were trying to pull it around a little bit was the idea of the capturing the conscience of a king is obviously in Shakespeare's not meant a physical king in a physical kingdom, but really this is slightly more abstract, but really about trying to capture the business of kingdoms, be they republics or council areas or whatever it happens to be, but the place in which a polity lives, a demos lives, in that Greek sense. And on Sunday in the Observer, there was a fascinating piece on theatre that sort of plays into that. And I'll just read it. It's by what was her name?
Charlotte Higgins.
Charlotte Higgins, right. So Charlotte Higgins writes, "It is possible that inquiry about political plays is really in the end an inquiry about form, that the political in theatre lies at least as much in its structures as in its content. In any case, as the artistic director of the Almeida, Robert Gould, says, many political plays, in fact, suffer from the same ills as the politics they describe. In other words, they provide only a comforting certainty. They are chillingly normative, bracingly confirming what the audience thought they believed, i.e., that the financial sector needs punishing and that climate change is bad." Now, it's a very long piece and it's well worth reading. And it is a very unusual case in certainly within the British media of actually looking directly at the question of form in theatre. In fact, actually, as she kind of goes to the very end, there's another interesting part down there where she says perhaps the most politically radical thing theatre is doing this spring of 2015 is not airing the issues of the day, but insisting its audience sit in a place with our fellow human beings, watching other human beings doing and speaking, being moved to pity and fear, and insisting its audience do so, furthermore, without recourse to email, Twitter, or Facebook, without, for a span of time, contributing to the algorithmic churn of Google. That, maybe, is the small, true act of resistance that all theatre goers undertake. Greg, you're the one who pointed me at this in the first place. Just give us some of your own brief thoughts on that as a stimulus to conversation.
Yeah, I mean, theatre cannot, as we've known for a long time, cannot match the technological wizardry that has been done in theatre itself, right? And certainly not in the digital world. Theatre is like the core statement. It's the small statement. It's the raw statement, and it does not need dressing up to be made. It doesn't need anything but the language, the actors, the form, and the audience. And somewhere, I think we've lost that. Now, that's what theatre essentially is, just with those elements. But and through the mouth of there's a play written or created in some way. This is taken into the bodies of the actors. The actors then put forth that play, those words, the interpretation of those words that they've either been schooled to learn through their directors or through their own sort of way of going about things. But if they have to spew those words out, they have to spew them out to where the audience is. That the nature of the placing of the audience affects the way in which they get those words out, so they make an effect with the audience. Now, if the audience is on one side, then those words get spewed out in a different way from when the audience is on two sides or three sides or four sides. The presence of the audience and the actual placing of those words by the actor to the audience alters what the meaning of those words are according to where you have to place the words. So if you're working from an end stage, right, then the relationship, the way that those words get delivered, affect the intonation of those words, affect the purpose of those words, affect the direction of those words, so that they get a certain meaning. You suddenly realize you've got an audience on the second side, then you cannot produce those words out in the same way as you did when you had audience on one side. Those words therefore have to bisect, they split up, that they have to go in more than one direction. And the physical way in the physical way in which the actor delivers those words changes. And if you deliver the words physically in a different manner, then the words themselves obtain nuances that have not been in the way that you've delivered the words in the first place. So no matter how much you've learned how to deliver the words and the basic meaning of the words that you're saying, what comes over to the audience is a diffracted one. That is, it goes in two directions. No, you put it in a round, and you come out, the actor comes out, and those words that have been trained to say with this particular meaning get said, with the actor stepping into the middle of the acting area and saying these words directly to one group of people. Those words are not therefore fully delivered until they're getting to the people behind, and the people behind get a different view of the actor and a different view of the relationship of the actors, and therefore cannot help but put a different meaning on those words. They don't come over in the way that the actor thinks they're coming over, as a sort of a set block thing that everybody's receiving the same one. Now, in any audience, there's a difference, a slight difference in the way that the words move according to where you're sitting. So even in a straight sort of one-sided theatre, those words are being broken up and handed piecemeal to different members of the audience, and each member then applying their own sort of differences get a different meaning from the word. So there's a jumble of meanings coming over there. But when you put the audience all the way around, the actual meaning of the form begins to alter those words and the significance of those words.
Can you give an example of how that works, almost on a sort of a physical or a metaphysical?
All my life I've been wrestling with the round, okay, mostly. But I've worked on the proscenium at different. I've worked earlier on the proscenium, right? You take a proscenium stage. It's a raised stage. It's a raised lit space, right? That immediately separates the actors from the audience. The actors are delivering those words from a raised lit space to a group of people who are in the dark, mostly, or in the dark, right, and at a lower level. But the travelling of those words from what the actors gather about themselves, in the importance that they have, their role to the audience, their status, is established by the fact they're on this raised lit space, right, above the audience. And in the proscenium theatre, there are areas around that space. You know, so there's a kind of a social thing going on before the words are actually delivered, and the social thing is dependent upon the form. And if you change that form, if you suddenly took those same actors with those same words, right, and the same play, and said, no, we're going to dump you in the middle of this hall and we're going to sit the audience all the way round, then inevitably what those words mean, the value, the weight of those words gets changed, with nobody having to do anything differently except sit there and watch and or sit there and or come out and perform. You can't. It's the way that the words travel from the actor to the audience that affects the meaning, and that meaning alters according. The nature of the audience sitting around is a different audience, a different feel, a different relationship. And those are the things that make the real statement, or the statement possible, within the content, right? But the form is affecting it. And you know me, I'm an extreme. I believe if you work off a stage, right, the proscenium stage, no matter what you're saying and however radical you think you're being, you're actually serving the purposes of the social setup that has created that stage.
Well, in a sense, isn't that exactly what Higgins is talking about? Is that political theatre, particularly, I mean, in distinction with classical Greek theatre, which set out to embrace controversialism, to be a kind of a deep moral challenge to politics, as well as a political challenge, so to speak. That what's the word she used? Chillingly normative. In other words, just confirming the status quo. And I don't know if you've said this specifically, but in a sense, what you're sort of aiming towards is this idea that the form itself is what helps to produce that confirmative, those confirmative statements, those conservative politics, if you like, conservative with a small c, i.e., conservative can be
the politics, the psychology, the psychiatry, right, of those words is affected by the symbolic meaning of the space within which they are delivered, or within which they are set. And we've had this. It's not always been the proscenium theatre. It's not always had curtains, although the Greeks introduced the idea of curtains, I think, in the first place. It's that there is within the nature of the performance is the idea that the actor is speaking on behalf of somebody, some force, some sort of permission, getting permission from the form, and the form actually states where that permission comes from. Is that clear? When you go and take a play and you put it onto say an end stage, you are saying, I have a different relationship with my audience than I do if I step in the middle of those people. And that relationship, that status, that is what fixes the meaning of the play at its deepest level. It's the glue that holds the play to the society that the form is a symbol of.
So can you give us an idea of what effect that is likely to have on the author and his intent to write the play?
Well, the author, most authors in the theatre write for a particular form. They write for a form. They know the form. A lot of them are actors who work within that form, and they know that if they put the language over in a certain way, then it gets out to the audience in a way, so that they write to the form that they are used to. I mean, I've been trying to read Jez Butterworth's plays, who's supposed to be the figure of the moment. It's set out like a pre-Shaw play.
Mm.
And it's
In what respect, Greg?
Sorry?
In what respect?
Well, I mean, when you get the book, it's got all the stage directions in there. It's not allowing the language to speak for itself. Raymond Williams said of a Shaw play, you take out the stage directions and you're left with, very often, almost an empty page, right? With about 5 words on it. And those 5 words are often meaningless if you don't have the stage directions with them.
And from your point of view, that's a classic example of the form overlaying the language.
Yeah,
and constraining the language.
Form that is there before the play gets written, right? The demands of that form, you have to explain the circumstances in which those words are being said for the words to have a meaning.
So what's the effect of taking a play off that proscenium stage with all of those conventions? And these are layered conventions in a sense that have been building up over time, over the development of the institution.
I mean, those conventions that come about with the idea of print, that you put the play in print first of all, and therefore you have to explain to an audience what, you know, who do not have the picture of the play, do not see it. You have to explain to them what you're looking at. But what the effect of that is to weaken the language, because the language itself should be able to convey to an audience, even when it's being read, it should be able to convey to an audience what the essential meaning of that language is.
And is that something that you've discovered from working in the round? That this is a necessary condition for communicating?
What led me to the round?
No. I mean quite specifically this thing about freeing language, letting language speak for itself without directorial annotations that tell the audience or the actors how this thing must be delivered.
Yeah, well,
is that a condition that arises specifically from taking it off the stage and putting it into the middle of the audience?
Partly, but I mean, I was on to that before I got on to, before, you know, seeing the work of Stephen Joseph. I got into the around 1957. I was working in, I left university in 1952, and of course a lot of the Jacobean plays, I did a Jacobean play then that where there was very little of this stage directions. You know, you just read the words with little bits. I mean, some stage directions are essential, but they're not stage directions that set the scene. They're little bits of things that help you sort of just understand something about the text. But it doesn't attempt to interpret the text for you, or to say, look, if you don't put the play in this setting, then these words don't have any meaning. But the idea that the form alters the meaning of things, I got from art, you know, from this business of significant form. The Bloomsbury group, the Clive Bell and some other bloke whose name I forgot now, were on about that a painting is not the subject of the value of the painting is not the subject of the painting, but the form of the as it were, the way that it's not a jug that you're seeing. I think they were talking about a Picasso thing. You're seeing the kind of form that is inherent within that jug, right? It could be anything. The subject matter could be anything, right? But the form within which it is painted, right, produces this subject of the jug. But you're not looking at the jug as the subject of a jug, right? Although that plays some part in it. You're actually appreciating the way that the paint and the spaces and the shapes have been placed upon the canvas in relation to the whole thing. And that awareness, that significant form has always been that for me then, you know, and whether I came to it, I remember where I read the book. I was reading a book when I was on holiday in the on the Isle of Wight. But it sort of confirms what you learn from books that you take in, confirms something within yourself to begin with. Your mind suddenly leaps to that passage because, yeah, that's right. That's where I'm going. There are quite a number of books coming out like that now that I respond to. But you start with something. I mean, for me, it was this production I did at King's London in 1950 of The Witch of Edmonton, this Jacobean play. And although it was considered a success, it was there that my dissatisfaction with the proscenium began, and then led me on to, by the time I left university, I was convinced that what the proscenium was presenting was not my world. I couldn't work within it. It had demands about actors.
So I'm going to come back to this, right? So I mean the biographical story we've kind of talked about before, but there's something in this business about the shift in form. And remember, we're trying to figure out, is there a medium in the modern age that can help to capture what it is to be human? In essence, the conscience of the king.
I take the conscience of the king in a sense, very widely metaphorically, to mean the conscience of the important demands of life at that time. That is the things that are moving, not necessarily through any one person's mind, but what is shaping up to be the big issue of the day.
Yes.
Right. What we have to pay attention to. And it's quite clear that we are politically, in all sorts of ways, shifting to important issues of the day that are perhaps not even yet been given voice to, though climate change and stuff like that are part of them. But it's kind of not that. It's that things are happening within the spirit of the time that don't work, and it's an attempt to redefine the spirit that enables the human race to survive or to go on and discover aspects of itself that it's neglected in the past and so on.
Where does form come into that?
Sorry?
Where does form come into that? Because we've been talking about this shift. I mean, I find this frustrating sometimes to try and nail this down. But in some ways, you know, your mention of Shaw and that accretion of convention around what it is to put on a play gets more and more tactical. It relies on tactical, particularly since the television age, I think the film age, and then most particularly the television age, and that to create a convincing illusion, a realistic illusion on the stage, then more and more encumbrances to that fresh use of strong, simple, direct language is one of the things that's disappeared. And what's supporting it in many cases are conventions, relatively new, late 19th century, early 20th century conventions, which are heavily inflect that whole experience of form in the traditional sense.
To me, there's paradox that you've touched on there. That is to create a realistic theatre, which is a theatre which is supposed to be as close as it can get to real life. You have to invent all these totally unnatural encumbrances.
Well, that's part of it. That is part of it, right? So that's the paradox. But the point is, what is it that keeps theatre pumping out the confirmative stuff, the what Higgins calls chillingly normative, bracingly confirming what the audience thought they believed, that the financial sector needs punishing, that climate change is bad. In other words, it's simply pushing back to the audience what the audience already believes. There is no cultural, spiritual, or moral challenge in the experience, is what she's saying. And that, but you're kind of proposing going further than just doing what she says is the radical thing, which is going back to theatre and sitting in a room with other people, which is to say, change the form.
Unencumbered.
Get off the stage, put the form in the middle, sit the audience around the outside, and start from scratch.
In a simple way. I mean, it's tied in with politics. It's tied in with social things, right? The more we arrive at the kind of society we've got now, the more the makers of the performance have the license to spend money, have the license to try out all sorts of tricks, right? The design, the lighting specialist, they've become more and more technologically not complete. I mean, they go into those things. They can create all sorts of magic little tricks that go around the play, right? And that, okay, if that's what you want, that's fine. And the musical has been doing that for some time. But the thing is that we're losing this essential truth that is within the language. And language on its own, unencumbered, that is where an audience receives the language purely and has to make the imaginative decisions that go with that language, that has been stripped of all these attempts visually to provide that imaginative moment.
Because in a sense, I'm just trying to get to this point of form, right? And why form dictates content, because that's the premise of most of your theses on around this. And the withdrawal of the visual, in a sense, is an inevitable consequence of the decision to put the audience all the way around. There cannot be a backdrop. There is no fourth wall. The audience exists in the same space as the actors do, and therefore the only thing that's in common between them is the language.
But in the round, in most round theatres now, the role of the designer has become more and more important. They're trying to replace, the backdrop, the background to it, by some sense of design.
And in your book, that's a refusing of the essence of the form.
That actually is a way of still keeping the audience at arm's length, keeping the audience in the dark, of saying we can do this and you can't do that and you can't do it. The thing is, the form is just a simple matter of shape. I mean, I've referred to this before. A group of a religious order took over a house. And the Grove, when I was here at the school here, the headmaster met these people, and it was that they couldn't work. They found that the house did not fit their belief. That something about the architecture of the house did not fit their belief, right? So they altered the house. They did things to the house in order to bring it into tune with their religious beliefs, right? But in altering the house, they then found that it still didn't work. It was kind of an artificial thing. And then the house began to affect their religious beliefs. Now, I can't go into any more than that because it was ages ago that happened. But this sense that architecture affects what can go on within the architecture, the shape of the architecture, the shape of the building, the shape of the space, affects what can go on in that space and the interpretation of what goes on in that space.
There's a parallel to that in Joseph Campbell's book, The Masks of God, where he kind of looks at stories and mythologies right from primitive times to right up to the modern, to Joyce's Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake and various other things. And one of the things he points out is how the actual religion of certain Native American tribes transformed within a generation radically from the prior environment where they were, I can't remember which way around it was, where they were farmers to one where they became effectively hunter-gatherers, or perhaps it was the other way around. And so that shift in environment, the shift in occupation, shifted the cosmology, the cosmological understanding of that tribe, such that they began to worship in a different way, a radically different way, because the environment around them had shifted radically.
Yeah, well, I've read most of Joseph Campbell. I don't remember a lot of it now, but I mean the essence of it. So I think Campbell probably did play a part in my own perception, or as evidence of you know, the kind of the perceptions that I play around with now. But it's basically form is the relationship of the inner thing with the outer thing. That is, you put a building, you stick up a building, right, according to certain precepts that you have, right? When you start putting people in that building and they try and go about the job that they did, they find, for all sorts of reasons, some of them very common, that is, you know, the rooms that they need to operate in are in different relationship with each other and so on. But what goes on in that building begins to suit that building, gets altered. We can't do that in this building because it doesn't work in this building, so we'll do something else, right? So you've got this idea of the architecture, which is form, you know. It's basically it's the I've lost you now. It's the basis. You know, we get our architecture is about form anyway.
Okay, so look, I want to try. I don't want to force this to an early close, but I do want us to come back and try and deal in the last sort of 5 to 10 minutes that we've got to dealing with this question that we set out with. Oh, I wasn't very clear at the beginning, I'm afraid, but do we have a medium which is capable of capturing the conscience of a king? Is it, as you suppose, theatre in the round? And if it is, how so? Why is this other form more capable of capturing who we are, or probably who we are becoming? Like those Plains Indians moving from one environment to another. If
you take away the idea of theatre and just see it as assembly, right? That in order for messages to be conveyed, you have to assemble in a certain place. If you assemble with the leaders sitting up on a platform, addressing everybody else sitting down, you are, you know, at a lower level, as happens still in most places. You are, in fact, making a statement about the importance of the people on the platform as opposed to the people on the floor. Therefore, you're making a statement about the kind of language that they use and the implications of that language in the discourse. But if you work, I mean, and that's the raiselets, the platform, right? The platform gives us a certain, I mean, beyond, no, not going into sort of what the platform also means in the overall relationship of what it is to live, and the rising platform and the going up to the sky and stuff like that. If you take those same people and you put the speakers in the middle, right, or balanced within a group of people sitting round, then you actually do change the nature, the whole atmosphere of that assembly. Because if you've got, say, 4 speakers, then you can put them at 4 points. Balance. There's a kind of balance needed. But those people are, those speakers lose that height, lose that sort of certainty. Look, what I am saying is all important, opposed to you sitting there with nothing important to say but simply to listen to me. 2, an awareness that the form itself actually tells you that there are people sitting all around who also have opinions, and they face each other and they can work with each other. And politics is moving to that, this idea of shifting the Houses of Parliament outside of London, because London is a bloody great proscenium stage. It's the raised lit space that we all have to look up to. That form spreads throughout the country. We're beginning, it's now being looked at and ridiculed. And somebody has suggested, some article I read, that there's actually a space in the Midlands, a village that is an ideal place to set up a part of Parliament, or you spread Parliament around or whatever. And we can use the Houses of Parliament as a kind of a museum for something like that. There's this idea that we move. We have to break this hold of that raised lit space. It's the same idea, but expressed in political terms. In therapy, this idea of what's the word called? I'm Pat. My daughter does a lot of it. Shared therapy. You know, where I forget, it's not the right term, but you actually, when you meet, then you share. You don't have an expert there telling other people why they are in the condition they're in. You actually have people discussing from their own imperfections, their own problems as a person, and sharing with other people ways in which that can be dealt with, and picking on the experience of everybody in that room sitting round.
And co-counselling, is it?
Yeah, co-counselling. That's what I was trying to think of.
Okay.
So we are in a time when, whether we know it or not, we are questioning the form in which we carry out our public commitments, our public connections, and that all you have to think of is people sitting round and what relationship they're in with each other, and the important people sitting on. I mean, if you look at any of these business of TED, do you know about TED?
Yes.
Yeah, right. It's always an expert coming on talking about their experience to people sitting down from that moment. A lot more would be got out of it if they were in the centre and they were actually sharing it. And I went to a conference in somewhere up in Wales, and I was the only person who worked in the round. But then, having done that, other people tried it, and they began to see it did actually create not only a different environment feeling, but actually change the nature of the experience that they were going through. And that's a simple change of form. The Houses of Parliament, there you've got it. You've got these two sides, right, set up for oppositional battles. And all you get then is a kind of shouting match, particularly between, you know, the people who've got the important people who've got their little bench there, because the form won't allow them to do anything else. Right? Whereas if you conceive of, I mean, we're beginning to move a bit. You get the semicircle now in the European Parliament, which is kind of a part of the way there, but you've still got your table and the important peoples. If you actually worked in the round and try to work out the consequences of that and the symbolic implications of that at every level, you will understand that a different world is possible. You don't have, in the round, you don't have to have two lumpen sides, as it were, beating hell out of each other, with a speaker at the top acting as a kind of referee.
Okay. Just before we close, Greg, I mean, that's a good explication, I think, of form and why it's important. But it's this capturing of the conscience of a king. That's the thing that. So if I just were to reflect on the things that you've said as a way of concluding the conversation, it seems to me that in a sense relying on an expert author to come up with a singular voice, and this is ironic because in a sense before we came on we were looking at Dante, and Dante is one of the earlier kind of named writers of literature that endure in the certainly in the early modern era, if you like. And then with Shakespeare, that begins to take off. By the 17th and 18th centuries, named writers, named authors are the thing, and it's almost as though we've come to that peak, and we're getting to the point where the individual perspective on society is insufficient to take on board the complexity of what it is we've become.
No, because the individual, it's this business between the individual and the collective, and that individual voice needs to be there, right? It needs to have its say. It needs to, and in the round, those individual voices can have their say, in fact, with a bit more. But we do need a place where an individual with an idea can detach themselves, as it were, from the practical business of making decisions and things like that, and say, no, I can see, through my perspective, I can see this, and it's important that I am able to say it.
Yeah, no, I take that as an important qualification, but I guess what I was pushing at was this idea of the rise of the named individual, the person who comes out of the collective, and in which the collective is kind of left behind as a chorus, not even as a chorus, as a voiceless chorus that simply consumes whatever it is that's pushed at them. And that what you're talking about is not necessarily taking the name away from the author or insisting they go back into the mass, but that they speak to the masses of the mass could speak back individually.
I mean, in instant theatre, it's the individual who speaks, who provides the information that makes the collective story. And that individual contribution is sacrosanct. So it's the circle is not made up of a mass of unidentified people, right? It is there of a group of a circle of individuals, all of whom are capable of having a say. They might come into that circle for a political reason, but some of those people, everybody has a name in a particular area. Everybody's name counts, whether it's simply in their family or whether it's in locality or is the local milkman or whatever. But within an assembly, their voice is not divided into strata, into classes, right, into education or any of those things. The voice counts because it is the voice of an individual, and we have to listen to the voices of the individual in order to allow a different concept of the collective to develop.
Okay, so I'm still trying to struggle with this idea of the conscience of the king, and
the conscience of the king is that important matter of the day, that sort of material that is at the core of the way that a particular decade or a particular era, a particular period of society needs to work, the burning issue of the day, as it were, right? Then it's the form provides the means whereby those issues can be got at in a way that actually is opened out to, it affects all the people gathered within that assembly. And so it's the king idea, the king. I mean, I don't like the word king, but I mean that's a Shakespeare term in a way. But it's the idea that the important issues of the day, right, we now assume to belong to the important people of the day, and that's what people are kicking up a fuss about that, right? In saying no, but it actually is not. It doesn't concern me. It doesn't work for me in the way that you say it's working for you. I mean, practically every statement of Osborne is a statement by Osborne that is supposed to have a universal truth because he's a bloody Chancellor of the Exchequer. But actually, it's got little to do with the way that most people have to live their lives. And somehow that urgency of I am a part of this society and I must have a way in which I can belong to it or choose to belong to it. And I'm not speaking for myself in the sense that I stand up and I say this and therefore it's true, but I am contributing my original idea to a host of original ideas that instant theatre does, and out of that comes a story which is a kind of a dream of what our society could be.
Okay, and I think on that we'll leave it there. So thanks to my regular guest, R.G. Gregory. This is Mick Fealty saying thanks for joining us, and stay tuned. We speak generally on Wednesday nights. We broadcast some of the conversations. You can find us on roundtheatre.blogspot.com, and we'll see you in future weeks.
Okay, thanks.